Okay folks, so I tried to do it live and it wasn't working live, so I'm just gonna try to do this as video and then I'll upload it. So we're here, we're about 10 miles away from the Capital One complex off of 495. We've gone 10 miles to the east and now we're in Chevy Chase, Maryland, and I'll sort of, oh shoot, I guess I forgot, I can't turn around the camera on this one. So we're at Howard Hughes Medical Institute and we're in Chevy Chase, Maryland, and when we're done I'll walk around and I'll show you what the lay of the land is. I forgot that we can't turn the camera on the regular video. So we're in Chevy Chase, Maryland. I'm at Howard Hughes Medical Institute, and I made a little heart there. I made it out of charcoal and maple flyers and some tulip poplar buds and little trumpety horns and wild rice, and I think it's quite lovely. So we'll go over and look at that when I'm done putting it together. So this research lab was developed in the 1993. The original Howard Hughes Medical Institute was in Miami, Florida, and it was created by Howard Hughes for biomedical research. And then at the end of his life, his will, which was contested, ended up all of the assets going into this philanthropic trust for biomedical research. And then in the late 1990s, a campus was established here in Chevy Chase, Maryland, and I think the Miami one was shut down. And then in 2016, there was a brand new campus, which is actually out, I think, towards Ashburn, Virginia, which is about half an hour outside of DC. And that is the Genelia Research Center, which is a very boutique, elite research institution, sort of sky's the limit funding, and working on mechanical neurocognition and 4D cellular simulation, and all of it linked to behavior. So I would say definitely I'll include a link to the Genelia Research Campus, but their focus is in interdisciplinary learning, and essentially they have a 15-year time horizon. So they research something, essentially they'll create the markets, right? And then they'll leave it to the private sector, and that's what this money is for, is to create the markets. And so these first two projects are the mechanical neural cognition and the 4D cellular simulation, both of which would be tied to consciousness and behavior. And of course, the managed behavior change is linked to social impact finance, these pay for success deals, as well as the tagged data transmission through the sensor networks will be feeding the AI and training the AI towards the singularity. So that's where we are. Now, it's interesting, the location, a mile and a half that way is both Walter Reed Hospital, the Army Hospital, and the headquarters of the National Institutes of Health. So that's the one exit away from here on the highway. And then a mile that way is the Washington Temple of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it's interesting because at the time of Hughes's death, he was a very eccentric man. He, was frail, a recluse, and when he died, there were questions about his will, because essentially all of these assets in Hughes Aircraft were funding this foundation, and there were questions about it. And so at the time, in 1976, this will shows up in the Salt Lake City Church office of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it was connected to a gentleman who ran a gas station in rural Utah, who years previously was said to have picked up Howard Hughes walking on the highway, or like injured, maybe after a plane crash or something like that. But he was wandering around in this remote highway. I don't know if he was wandering or laying on the road, but the guy picked him up and took him to Las Vegas for medical attention. And ironically, it turned out to be actually Howard Hughes. So this will that shows up later in this sort of, it's either typewritten or handwritten, but it was not a formalized will, in the Salt Lake City office of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, divided the estate of Hughes, who was like one of the richest people in the world at that time, into 16 parts. And one of the 16 parts was supposed to go to the church, and another of the 16 parts was supposed to go to this gas station attendant who had picked him up out in the desert. And it's called the Mormon Will. So you can look it up, the Howard Hughes Mormon Will. So again, that it's a mile south of the Washington Temple feels significant. And early in my sort of my first post-college experience, I spent not even quite a year at the University of Maryland at College Park, which is a bit down the road that way, studying art history, which has come, the symbolism analysis has come into use in very unusual ways, like learning about like which saint had which things on a plate, like eyeballs or boobs or churches or whatever, like looking at the symbology and making the larger connection within context. That was really helpful. So I was in College Park and I would drive around the Beltway, you know, fairly regularly during that time. And you would see the walls and the spires of the temple over the Beltway wall. Like it was, they have these sound barriers. So you couldn't really ever see it. So I'm hoping to go to that next, just to see it like more than just the top bit. But that location feels significant. And for the people who maybe don't know anything about Howard Hughes, I didn't know much about him either beyond like airplanes and movies. But last fall, Jason and I, when we were doing site work in Texas, we went to Houston and we did several visits. And one of those visits was and I can't remember the name of the cemetery, but it was a beautiful historic cemetery, very, very fancy monuments, beautiful landscaping. Victoria, dated back to the 19th century cemetery, and Howard Hughes was buried there. So I wanted to sort of find his burial site and talk about his work, because essentially Howard Hughes came from a family that was very wealthy, and they had made their money in oil, but not actually in the oil itself, but in renting drill bits. And so the drill bits that his father developed that made oil deposits that were otherwise inaccessible accessible, and you need to think about that in terms of data is the new oil, right? Data that was otherwise uncapturable, capturable, and this is actually petroleum. But he developed this sophisticated drill bit, but he would only lease it to clients. They could never actually own it. And so today that's sort of the equivalent, I think, of all of the, you know, everything by subscription, software by subscription. You don't ever get to own it. You just are submitted to like whatever, their upgrades, their updates on their terms at their price. And then if you stop paying, you lose everything. So you're sort of held hostage to the rental agreement. And so that's how his father made his money. And I think they died early on when he was still a young child. He was interested in tinkering, this is Howard, tinkering, making inventions, and also wireless radio communication. So he had an inquisitive scientific mind. But after his parents died, sort of his first foray was in Hollywood, in filmmaking. And so, you know, the more and more we're looking at it, and again, my friend Steffers is looking into this transmedia storytelling and the way in which we imprint reality through media, both print media, digital media, film media, that, you know, Hollywood creates worlds, right? And so that's part of what his early career was. And then he got into aviation. And we know about the Spruce Goose, which was sort of a flop. But he worked in aviation and also helicopters. He had a Hughes helicopter company as well. But in the late 1950s, in 1959, he spun out a company called Hughes Research Lab. And the reason I actually found out about him was that I was researching the history of lasers. And they were among the first people to develop laser technology. And again, so many things run on lasers today. They used to seem like space age technology, but even like the little scanner and the grocery self-checkout at the stores, those are lasers. And so Hughes Research Lab has always been about emerging technology, and they still are. And this Malibu campus was actually sort of laid out or developed by Del Webb. And Del Webb is a real estate developer in planned communities, a lot of which were in sort of these early senior living communities in Arizona. And if you think about what I was talking about with Capital One, the planned community, and these other two communities that I hope to see if it's not pouring down rain, Greenbelt and Columbia, Maryland, these planned communities, is the idea of social engineering through your built environment. And this is something I talked about in one of my blog posts about the refugees, this idea of cyber physical systems, Internet of Things systems, interacting with you and learning your culture. And so I really do think, even going all the way back to the 60s, this idea of emerging technology and digital utopias, which are probably more likely to be dystopias, rolling out, is important to consider, because Hughes Research Lab right now is very much into the photonics, into the microprocessors, into like cutting edge Internet of Things technologies. And these are all things that will be eventually interfacing with our bodies, either through wearable devices, implantable devices, carrier waves, frequency waves. And this is something that goes way back to Hughes's work, both with the military and this aviation contracting. So when he died in 1976, there was the contest over the will, so the Mormon will, and that didn't win out, and the assets got channeled into the medical research facility. Originally, it was located in Miami, Florida, and then in 1993 it came up here, and then I think in 2016 they added an additional campus, that Genelia campus out there. They also fund research investigators all over the world, all over the country, specialized teams. It's sort of like sky's the limit on the amount of money that's available. And I did not realize the influence of the Howard Hughes Medical Institute in the biotechnology space, in the R&D space, because they're very much about developing the cutting edge systems, right? And then once they get it up and they get the market for it, then they turn that over to the private interests. But these philanthropic vehicles are meant to catalyze and create the new markets, essentially in the open air prison, right? In Human Plus, in digital twinning. And all of it's going to be happening around wellness behaviors. So I believe this original campus their focus was things like heart disease, diabetes, HIV, and of course it's all dual use. And no one wants to say, well, how can you be against heart research? And I'm not, but the thing is, we need to actually understand the historical trajectory going further back and like where it's going forward. So if this research, if they are developing tools, visualizations, data around issues that are very relevant and actually may be related to environmental triggers. I mean, let's be real, because diabetes is very much connected to dirty energy, dirty power and frequencies. And even heart, like the cardio stuff, we can imagine is coming relating to frequency systems. They can use those research programs and then down behind the things, the findings that are developed, apply them in a dual use space to things that we might not even imagine as ethical or human at this point. And maybe those are, we don't know what's going on at the mechanical neurocognitive science lab. And that's not out in the public because these are private interests, right? This is private money. A lot of the, signatories around these contracts, it's private. We're not necessarily intended to know what's going on until after it's rolled out and they've already got these big marketing campaigns to tell us how wonderful it all is. So, looks like somebody was going into the thing. So that's Howard Hughes. We've got big oil, and this is what I found when I was doing my education work. A lot of the money went back to the oil companies, and I don't think it was just about them repositioning their markets. It was about making new markets, and the data being the new oil in our biochemical, biological data, mental health data, environmental data, the radioecology. That's all data that needs to be captured, and they're developing that infrastructure and tools to see it and measure it. The private research, the creating the markets, the interface with smart system technology and smart developments, because Howard Hughes actually does have a real estate development firm, and they, I believe, are managing now Columbia, Maryland, this sort of smart community. They didn't start it. That was Rouse, was the guy who initiated, I think Joseph Rouse, but now Howard Hughes' company manages it, and they have other planned communities. And so how does the Internet of Bodies, the Internet of Bio-Nano things interface with cyber-physical systems and impact finance and prescribed pathways? So, cognitive design, right? Free agency. How do we stop being, from ending up non-playable characters in our own life? So I'm just going to stop here, and then I'll turn around the camera and I'll do a little walk around, and I'll show you the little heart we left here. Okay, so I've just walked up the block. We're just, again, this setting is very suburban neighborhood, nondescript. Really wouldn't know anything about all of this. There's a lovely campus. It almost looks like an academic kind of setting. They've got walking paths, right? Because I'm sure that there's eventually going to be the prescribed behaviors. Let me see. So you can sort of see, again, lovely landscaping. Almost been here 20 years now. You can imagine the money that's going into this. There's a lot of landscape to be tended here. And, again, just looks like a really nice campus, but Again, fenced. There's the little walkway so everyone can stay healthy. So here we are just out on the public sidewalk, and use a little pruning. I guess they're not used to people actually walking on their sidewalk. So strolling down a bit, and then I decided to leave it on. There's a little knee wall here. Got the little dolls and the sweetgrass. And so this one, as I mentioned, I did it with charcoal from our fire pit, and that sort of exemplifies, actually coal soot is natural nano and nanotechnology that's ultimately carbon nano is used to make some of these nano materials. Oh, let me lift this off. And I surrounded it with the maple flyers from here. These were from here, and you can see the poplar buds and a little thistle. Someone sent me that, and so I've got the prickly bits. The fern is from the walk yesterday, and a fall leaf, early fall, right? We're back to school time, I guess. And then we've got the little dolls, and it's surrounded by lavender and dandelion. So we've got our heart, and then this is just, the front. I won't get too close, but, and this is just, again, the original campus was in Florida. This is the second campus, and then they have an additional campus that is working on the other stuff outside of Virginia. Oh, there we go. I'm sure I'm on camera. And then Howard Hughes Memorial Institute. And it's interesting to me, again, you've got green, which is imprinting on nature, not the magenta. If it was magenta, that would be interesting. But the HH, that logo, it also seems a bit like a twinning there. So HHMI Howard Hughes.